we are now recording. Thank you guys for joining us for another great episode of Noire Life Presents. I am the host and editor-in-chief of Noire Life magazine, David Cheney Jr. And tonight I have the pleasure of having on Jahmi Pérez. She we actually met through a mutual friend, and this is funny. This is our first time meeting, like, ever. So it's not awkward, to say the least, because this is how a lot of people are meeting now, right? But I definitely wanted to acknowledge her presence and why she's here tonight. So it's October 16th, but September 15th through October 15th is Hispanic Latino Heritage Month. And even though I know people are asking, well, you're a Black magazine, but what people need to understand is that there's so much of Africa in the Hispanic and Latino community, and they're part of the African diaspora. And just to give some background about the African diaspora is basically when slavery was happening, the mid-Atlantic slave trade was taking place during those years. There were ships going everywhere from the west coast of Africa. So some came to the US, some went to the Caribbean, some landed in Colombia, Brazil, parts of Puerto Rico and Colombia, and the list goes on, Cuba. So they're all part of the African diaspora. They all have African roots. And over the years, there's been some tussling, kind of, sort of, between the Black and brown community and how we connect with each other. So I thought no time is better than now to sit down with a sister, Afro-Latino sister, to talk about what's happening and just to kind of give her point of view on things. And I would love for you guys to leave comments, when we finish this and post it, but I definitely want you guys to leave your comments and just kind of let us know how you're feeling about it. But without further ado, Jahmi, just give us a small introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Jahmi Pérez. My full name is Jahmi Pérez. I am from North Jersey, Jersey City, grew up, born and raised there, across the harbor from New York City. I identify as Afro-Puerto Rican. And so my mother came to the US when she was 12, and I am the first generation to be on the mainland. And so I grew up eating arroz con gandule and, dancing to salsa music, but being very Black for Puerto Rico. So, and that there's layers there for that, for sure. But, in my family, we're mixed race, so it's just some of us will have a little bit more melanin than the others. And so I am one of those cousins, and I'm very proud of my African ancestry. And so I'm happy to be here and talking about what it is to be Black and also Latina.
Thank you. You mentioned something to be Black in Puerto Rico. Could you kind of break that down? What do you mean by that?
Well, so I can't talk about it as like being from Puerto Rico. But what I mean when I say that is a lot of Puerto Ricans, especially Dominicans as well, they won't say that they're Black. Like, coming up, it was like, I'm not Black, I'm Puerto Rican. And that to me was confusing. That was like a confusing statement, because you could be both, and I'm both. And so, I had my white Spanish Puerto Rican teacher tell me that I couldn't be Puerto Rican because I was too dark skinned. And like in class, and then like half the class was like, what the heck are you saying? Like, do you not know your history? And then I just remember just being like, wow, I don't like, why, like, stepping into a space having to defend my Puerto Ricanness. I also I don't speak as fluently as I would like. And so there was a lot of sort of like, I felt like an imposter a lot of the times, in these like spaces, like when you go see your cousins over the holidays and stuff. I feel like there's like trying to rep the most Puerto Rican or Dominican or whatever your space is, like to see who's the most. And so the cousins that didn't speak Spanish were kind of like, oh, you're not as Puerto Rican, blah blah blah. But to me, I'm treated just as Puerto Rican in America as any of the others. So the discrimination wasn't held back anymore. So I feel with Puerto Ricans, we are clashing because we're not totally part of America. We're a territory or a commonwealth, excuse me. And that, so we don't get representation. But I mean, if you're not born in America on the mainland, however, we've contributed to the American way of life. I mean, our history, especially in World War II, how many Puerto Ricans gave their lives for freedom. We were experimented on. Don't get me started on the history, but it's sad, and so we're still dealing with that trauma as well. So I'm going on a rant, but I forget.
That's good. That's
So
good.
it's a lot of those things at once, all
Yeah.
the time. As a Black Latino, you're constantly like, you're not Black enough for the Black kids. You're definitely Black enough for the white kids, and Latinos just are grappling with their history just as much. So we're just like 20 years behind the US.
Wow. That's wow. That's a wow moment. When did you, when was that moment that it hit you that I'm Black? Like, you
Oh
know how all of us have that
gosh.
moment? Like, we run into that moment sometimes, like, because we're so sheltered within our communities and our families. And then when we go outside of that, there's that moment that happens, and it's like, I'm Black. When did that happen to you?
All right. So like what, like a moment I can remember, because I don't know if it probably had to happen beforehand, but I was young. I was like first grade, kindergarten, first grade. And a little girl took a napkin to my skin and started like, um, brushing my skin, and was saying like I was dirty because of my dark skin, and that she was like trying to like make me clean or whatever. And I remember going to my mom and being like, what does she mean? And so my mom was then having to explain like, we have different skin colors, different races, da da da. But I grew up very like with white cousins, Black cousins, Asian cousins, like I just didn't, I understood at a very young age the diversity in my own family, that it never like was like weird for me to be around different people. But I realized when I went out of that space into more segregated America, where there's less mixing, I would come up against like kids being for the first time like, oh, you're Black, and having to touch me like I'm a like specimen or something. So that was like the first time I was like, oh, like being viewed as different. And then like, like having like, what does she mean like I'm dark or dirty? Like I didn't understand that. Yeah.
So could you kind of help people understand the difference between, and this is something I mentioned, before we started recording, racial identity and cultural identity, because that could be very different for the same person. So could you kind of break that down for yourself? I guess the first part of the question, explain the difference, but then the second part of the question would be, how have you coped and how have you balanced that?
That's a good question. So I guess I will start with my culture. I grew up with my mother being the main person in my life driving my culture. She was cooking my meals for me. She was teaching me about the music whenever we were dancing. This is Tito Puente. This is Ismael Rivera. This is Celia Cruz. This was the music that was playing in my house. And so she was the one like, oh, let me tell you about El Gran Campo de Puerto Rico. They're this beautiful orchestra band mixed race, and they play beautiful classic salsa. It's great for a good party. So culturally, I'm growing up with, like I said, like rice, beans, like Puerto Rican food and Latino food and music. We're saying huepa. We're on Christmas. We're celebrating Christmas Eve until midnight, and then opening our gifts. Like there were little things sprinkled into American culture that was Puerto Rican. So now I have a fusion of America, which is my homeland, and also Puerto Rico, which is a mix of a bunch of stuff. And then somehow it was home for me. Like it became home. And I don't know, I guess as a kid, I got to the privilege of picking. I don't know if I'm saying picking, but leaning towards stuff that I liked from each culture. And at a young age, I understood what it meant to code switch very quickly. So when I'm in the space with grandma, abuela, I know we're going to be talking more Spanish, dropping like a little bit more Spanglish. And then I understood what it meant to be in white spaces, and how my mom would dial back her accent or dial back certain words, like, or even like the cultures were clashing. So we would have to like dial back Puerto Ricanness a little bit to I think now looking back, it's like for safety, for survival. But I think as a little kid, it was very obvious to me when we were going to be Puerto Rican enough, and then like dial that back because we're scamming white folks. So we got to calm down. So
had that moment.
Oh my goodness. And it's very young. You pick that up young. Like I remember like 4 or 5 watching it happen. I'm like, noted. Okay, noted. When we're here, this is now race was a little bit harder for me. I'll be honest, I grew up with internalized racism. I grew up like seeing myself as white. It's weird. I like shudder to even talk about it out loud. I'm in a good place now where I found forgiveness. I found like why I even got to that place. But it was hard for me, like even because I would be the person, I was like, I'm not Black, I'm Puerto Rican, da, 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 da. I think when in America, Black meant like Black culture, African-American culture in America. That's what it was to be Black. And if you look at the civil rights era, when we're moving away from using Afro-American, African-American, they're identified as Black. Like Black is beautiful, Black is proud, Black is that.
Power, yeah.
Oh yes, no, we were gonna say we were Black, and so that. But we don't hear about the Latin American history, about the Afro-Latin Americans that were standing side by side with Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. I mean, we have influences from Afro-Cubans coming in and marching. I can think of Roberto Clemente, who's a Puerto Rican baseball player who did a lot of activism. Actually, he passed away or died in a plane crash on his way to do some humanitarian work in Nicaragua. So he was marching, he was doing a lot of political stuff and jeopardizing his baseball like career. But we don't hear a lot about that because there were a lot of Afro Latinos that were fighting side by side for their Blackness. And I think there was this bonding of like, we're the lost, spread out brothers and sisters that got scattered along the coast. So I think I'm 31 now. And so I would say like in college is when I started to butt up against my racial identity. Culturally, I knew I was Puerto Rican, but I was the Puerto Rican with like the tighter curls. I had the darker, I mean, it's weird now because I don't get enough sun with COVID, but you know, when the sun hits, I brown very nicely. So I know there's this like spectrum of even my skin color, because I am mixed race. I mean, there is the slave owner in my blood. I mean, there's no getting around that. So there is European there. However, I know the European stories. I know the European instruments. I know the Spanish influence that's thrown in your face, even in my family. So my internalized racism, I learned from my mother because she had to survive as well. And so the straightening of the hair, you start to straighten your hair, you start to, whatever it means to be white in the space that you are. And it varies depending on where you are, whether that means going, whatever. So as I started to, stop hating myself, loving my Blackness, admitting to my Blackness. And man, I hit up the history books and it's all there. I mean, we don't even have to go that far into history. We could go to our food and see the African influence and our beautiful African mothers that cooked for us. It's all in the food and the music. Are you kidding me? That rhythm, that all those things, they're from, you could trace that back to Nigeria and other West African countries. But I think the way it's talked about in even Latin America, they'll be like, oh yes, this is our African heritage, but that it stops there. It's when you don't see the representation in media there, of the people. Celia Cruz is celebrated as one of the great musicians of our time, or at least in Latin America. But I don't know, I didn't grow up hearing about her Blackness. It's only this generation, millennials, that want to talk more, and then even the generation after us that is she freaking fought for her space to be there. Yes. She was turned away. She experienced just as much as any other Black person in America would have.
It's hardcore. She was.
Really. So, but that wasn't talked about at the table. That was too Black. And so, because it's heavy stuff. So I'm guessing, you don't want to talk about that trauma or whatever. So I hit up the history books. I started to realize not only am I Black, but we've been running this stuff. We've been the planters. We grew food. We revolted. I mean, Haiti is a whole country that is based off of a rebellion. I mean, and the Haitian and Dominican relationship is crazy. It's crazy. But I started to appreciate sort of that connection, because I feel like even as a Black Puerto Rican in America, I started to even butt up against Black culture, where Black kids were saying I wasn't Black enough. And they were right in a sense that maybe not in America. I don't have ancestors from the Great Migration that came up north, but my ancestors were the ones with the machete in the sugarcane fields revolting there. And we may not have came up from the South, but we crossed waters and to come over. We're even further south. So, so then I started to be like, no, I'm Black, and but I'm on the Caribbean. I got lost in the Caribbean there. I think to talk about history, because I love it. That we just gotta go back. I love it. Yeah, we're talking about 11.2 million enslaved Africans were taken to Brazil and or Haiti or Latin America first, because it's closer. It costs more money to go all the way to America, or to the US at the time of what was the US territory. So only less than 500,000 enslaved Africans went to America after unloading in Latin America first. So there's even more Black ancestry in Latin America than there is in the US territory. So to me, I was like, hold up, let's go. I'm even I don't want to say this. It's not a competition of who's more Black. I really hate that. But what I'm saying is I felt like I had to defend myself. I was gaslit. You're not Black, you're not Black enough. It's crazy. And so I started to grow my own roots so that I can no longer be swayed left or right. I had my roots to know who I was. and I could be bendy and flexible, you know, but I was going to stay put. And so that came in my learning my history, and then learning about all the beautiful Afro-Latinos that fought for their rights as well, alongside with the you know, the wonderful Black civil rights activists of the 60s as well. Like we're right up with them in that history. Like we're part of that. So yeah, long answer,
No,
but
I
the whole
love
thing
it.
is, I started to, culturally, that was always there. I feel like I understood that, but because Blackness wasn't embraced as much in my family, and community for that matter, um, you know, I had to survive. Like I wasn't going to do it as well. It wasn't taught to me. I learned that coming out of school, and then just doing my own research, of Black and Latin America, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. I like the fact that you took the initiative to educate yourself, which is something that, you know, as an educator that I try to do. I try to encourage students, you know, you have Google, you have stuff in the palm of your hand. Like, I mean, granted, you can't trust everything that's on the internet, but you know, there was a point in time, even just 10 years ago, because we're in that millennial age group, whereas in their 10 years behind us, we still had encyclopedias. You remember the encyclopedias?
Wow, you have to update that stuff every 2 years or whatever.
Exactly. And see, we were lucky because at least we had the small paperback set. Our parents had those hard covers, and you know, the kind with the pictures
and boot. Yeah.
And I'm just like, what is this? And now it's on your phone, literally.
Yeah, push updates. Yeah.
Encouraging young people to definitely tap into that, ask questions, and you know, you brought up a lot of great topics for tonight. But one of them is code switching. When does code switching cross the line? Because we talked about code switching, we talked about white spaces. When does code switching become to the point where it's no longer about, it's beyond survival, and it's more so it becomes assimilation?
That's a good question. I always even while I'm doing it, I'm aware of like, is this for survival, or am I just, you know, going along with the masses because, yeah, we're groomed and conditioned that way. I don't know. I definitely am stepping out of assimilation for sure. There was this moment where I felt rejected from a lot of my groups that the community around me. So like my Puerto Rican community versus like my Black friends versus my white friends versus my Asian friends. So when I went to college, I sort of lost all of that connection and grounding. It was either Black or white. And so I went to school in Northeast Pennsylvania. So yeah, like for me, I totally assimilated, and it was just like, you get tired. You get tired having to explain. I felt for me, every time I was in a space, I could feel the energy shift. People are trying to figure out like, and label who I am, where I am in the spectrum. If I'm the safe Black friend, am I the magical Negro? Am I the, you know, like where am I in this story for that? Because I'm definitely a supporting role. And I don't know. I still grapple with this because I'm still unlearning a lot of the things that I put into practice for what I thought was like being successful in this world. And to me, it was like, just be as white as possible and like try and skirt. Now I'm like, oh no, like they would love that. I have space enough for me, and I'm gonna make space even if there isn't. So yeah, I think that just took finding a history and learning about my people, and then rooting in that, and finding love for myself. Where now but I feel like when I'm older and I'm watching like my friends with their kids or whatever, and they're teaching them their social cues, I'm so aware. I'm like, why are you telling her to sit like that? Like that's to, like, I feel like it's hard, and I probably shouldn't be doing that, but I'm definitely much more aware of those sort of behaviors, because I assimilated real quick. Like out of college, I was like, oh no, I have to do tests and deal with white people. Oh no, whatever, dude. Like, I'll do whatever.
Right.
So, yeah.
Wow. So, since you've, been an adult, and you talked about growing up and how you were raised and the things that you were taught, primarily by your mom. Now that you've learned so much about your Black heritage, your African heritage, um, what does that conversation look like for her? Because I had this conversation recently with a friend. Um, each generation carries its own privilege.
Mm.
And what I mean by that, we have a privilege in our millennial stage that our parents didn't have and our grandparents didn't have. And even looking at my sister, who's 10 years younger than me, 9 to 10 years, she has a privilege that I didn't have. And so, prime example, now we're getting into therapy. Black people going to therapy, especially Black men are embracing therapy, right? And so this was something that was taboo 10, 15 years ago within our lifetime. Right. Like, you didn't talk about, but this is the way we dealt with it. Just go to church. Just go to lay it at the altar.
Pray. You're not praying hard enough.
Pray at the altar. And and that's what I told someone. I said, I have friends, especially when I went to college, whether you were Catholic or Protestant, it was always the same thing: religion. Turn to religion. That's your answer. That's your therapy. But no, you really do need to go to therapy, right? And that's something that wasn't always afforded to the generations before us. So in the same way, history wasn't always afforded to our parents and grandparents. Prime example, Juneteenth, which was a big thing this year, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember explaining it to my grandparents, and at first I was getting frustrated, but then it hit me. My youngest grandparent is like 77. Mm-hmm. My oldest living grandparent is 85. When they were in school, if they did have a chance to go into school buildings at that time in their life, that's not what they were taught. And so I had to leave space for compassionate understanding, and understanding that they were not afforded that privilege. And even my parents, when they were coming up, it was probably just a little small paragraph, if that, in a history book. And by the time our generation came up, hey, we got a whole page. Look at that. But now, thank God, especially in the school district of Philadelphia, we have what we call African American history class. So it's part of the curriculum. Like, kids have to take that to graduate, right? So that's a great thing. But our parents didn't have that privilege. So with you having the privilege of being able to learn about your Black African heritage, how does that conversation look now with your mother compared to her conversations with you years ago?
Oh, and I'm glad you touched on mental health, because it's all wrapped into this answer. I think my mom was in survival mode coming up in life, and what little breaths she was able to get, and spaces of rest, and that's when I was able to, she tapped into mostly cooking. Like, my mom loved cooking and making food. So that's when the conversations and the stories, she'll talk about when she was in the campo, which is like, the country, the farm, raising, gathering chickens and things like that. So I'll get stories from her like that. But she didn't really like to talk about a lot of things, because it was difficult. It was violent. It was sad. So I understood that at a young age, and wouldn't press. But because now I'm excited, I learned all this stuff, and I'm like, Mom, remember when you were telling me about this? Da, da, da? Did you know the Africans came over and da, 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 da? And so she'll listen. You know, she gets excited, but there's still this hesitation, I think, to embrace Blackness. It's so ingrained. The racism is so ingrained. You don't even see it or realize until you take the time to step back and draw it out. Really, it's like it's in the culture almost. So right away, for example, I'm talking about the dance style bomba, which is an African style of dancing. And the way I'm still learning, so excuse me if I mess up my facts, but basically it's a dance. It could be a dance for the ancestors. It's a dance between the dancer and the drummer. And I freaking love it. You have like this call in. It's very much like, you know, some African tribal dances. So I'm telling her about this, and she's like listening, and then she like lets me finish, and then ends with like, but you know, they like do voodoo, right? And brujeria, and like the devil. Like, okay, Mom, that's the way the white man has told us about these dances, because they needed to snuff it out for Christianity, you understand? Not to say that there isn't that. There's definitely brujeria, whatever. And for me, it's like, if that's your spiritual belief, go for it. I'm gonna respect you. But like, it's taboo. A lot of African stuff in the Caribbean is tied to voodoo and brujeria, which makes them evil. But to me, the undertone is Black is evil, of the devil, da 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 da, and it comes back to the stigmatism and basically the conditioning.
Black magic.
Exactly. So I challenge her a little bit at a time, because only because she you know, she steps to me. I was just telling her a story. She wanted, but I am aware that, like, even with okay, because I have to tie in sexual harassment and her being a woman and telling me her experiences as a woman. Sometimes I'm like, Mommy, that was sexual harassment. And she doesn't understand that. She's like, what? He just said I was pretty and didn't stop following me. And that's normal. That's just Tuesdays. So it's like this, for her to see like, oh, Ma, like, no, that's not okay. It's the same with Blackness, or the anti-Blackness. Like, that was actually racist and that was wrong. Or like, that way of thinking, it comes from, you know, Portuguese and Spanish slaveholders trying to come up with an excuse as to why slavery needed to stick around when people started questioning it as Christianity is spreading. So they needed to come up with an excuse of how to, of their treatment of these human beings, which they weren't treating as human beings at all. So another example is we're walking together, and I see this mother, and she must have just had this beautiful baby. It was so brand new, and it was a Black, beautiful baby with beautiful dark skin and chocolate. It was glowing, and her hair was just this beautiful silkiness, long. Oh, it was great. I mean, curly. And I'm like, look at that baby. She's so beautiful. Da, 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 look at her hair. And my mom's like, she's got that hair, that bad hair. I was just like, oh no, just breathe in and out. We're not about to go on your mom. But I was like, Mom, you can't be saying stuff like that, because I grew up listening to you say stuff like that. And then I'm looking at that baby, realizing that baby looks like me, and putting together that, oh, so then my hair is bad, you know. So little things like that I feel like I challenge her, you know, especially if they're like things that she says constantly. I'm like, Ma, that's like stems from racism. And but this year, actually, she identified as a Black woman. She's like, you know, as a Black woman. I was like, okay, Ma, because for a long time she's like, I'm Puerto Rican. I'm like, you are, and you're also Black. So there's still that separation.
Did you capture that moment when she said,
oh,
you can
I was really
later? So like, you said you were Black. Let me play it back.
Yes. I definitely was like, hold on, what did you say? She's like, what? Like, trying to play time. Yeah, I was really excited for her, because to me, I felt like okay, we're getting there. You're loving yourself. That means. I think that by not identifying as Black and being clearly Black is, there's a reason for that, and it's usually not from love. So.
And you know, you make a good point, and it all comes from systematic racism. You know, slavery. It goes back to slavery, and it's all about. And this is what I tell people. I help people understand when we talk about the rapper who shall not be called. When he mentioned that, oh, we could have got out of slavery, but no, we couldn't. It was something deeper than that, and this is what I want people to understand. Yes, we outnumbered them by, trust me, we definitely outnumbered the number of slave owners and plantation owners, but they had mental, emotional control. Mm-hmm. And the way they did that was to destroy our identity and make us think that we were less than. I mean, I learned in high school how to read the census reports. And one thing I learned was that Black people were not even mentioned until, I believe, 1870 in census. And if you saw any Black people mentioned in like a will or anything or any type of documents, it was usually they were mentioned as property. Mm. So when you go to look at a plantation owner's books, his books, his or her books, it's basically, oh, chair, Dorothy, table, Sam. Like we were listed, our ancestors were listed as property. And, you know, I think with that and then the added shame that comes along with it, because shame comes with trauma. You know, people don't want to talk about that. So to be Black was traumatizing and it was made shameful. And so that's why people want to be anything but Black for a long time. But now we're having this, what I like to call a renaissance moment, where everyone wants to be Black. Yep. And so now the question is, and I'm writing an editorial on this soon, are you being Black because it's beneficial or it's because of who you are? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's a big difference because you can write down that you're Black to get scholarships into college. Let's be real here. A lot of people go to college, you know, because they're a minority, especially PWI, but are you saying that you're Black because you really know it, you feel it, and you embrace it, you honor your ancestors? You know, it's more than just, it's not a title, it's not a position. You know, this is not something.
You can't take it off and you can't put it on.
People, we can't take this off. I don't go, like after this interview, I'm not taking this off and hanging this up. Oh, see you tomorrow.
Right.
It doesn't happen like that. It's not like on Lovecraft, right? You know, if it was that easy, you know, but it's not. Right. We live with this and it's internal. Right. And a lot of emotions come out of that. So I think it's beautiful what we're seeing now is a lot of our Latino and Hispanic brothers and sisters are coming forth and saying that I'm Black, you know? Right. Funny story, because I have to tell the story. So I remember growing up, I was in high school. I went with a relative to Walmart. And you know Walmart, we all love Walmart. Walmart has what we call ethnic aisles. They have one, you know, they have one in the hair section, and that's for folks of us that got, you know, curls. And then if you go in the food section, you have your Asian cuisine, Mexican cuisine, you know, Spanish food. And there was a bag of Black beans. And the beans had, they had, it was in Spanish. So it had the English and then it had the Spanish, Negro de frijoles. I may pronounce. Okay, because I passed Spanish, but I remember, I think I only passed the food section, like the food chapter. I got an A in that chapter. Everything else I failed. But I remember my relative that was with me saw it and was like, how dare they Negro? I'm calling the
Oh,
NAACP. And I was just like,
that's so funny.
I was like, no, that's oh God, they and it's a funny joke. It's a nice little funny story, but that's how much America, white America, um, the forefathers, as they like to call them, have assimilated us into this thinking that black is negative, black is bad. Because something as small as that, it's like, no, they're black beans. That's what they call black in Spanish.
Right.
But because it has such a negative connotation to it and trauma attached to it, going back to the 50s and 60s, that's what that relative remembered.
Right.
And so we have to definitely talk about that. And I appreciate the fact that you have those conversations with your mom.
I have to.
You know, it's one thing when you're teaching the generation after you. It's a very different thing when you're teaching the generation before you.
Right.
Because they're already set in their way. Like, this is it. This is what I believe. This is
and that's it. You're not moving me, right? And I think part of that is like it's easier. They're tired. They're done trying to learn what word's okay now. Not that it's okay. I this is me trying to empathize so I don't get so critical, and this is me also putting myself in check and realizing what I'm bringing to the table as well. But yeah, she's from a generation where like having to think about why she had to work 2 jobs while some other families, white families, are to have a totally different life than us. And it's not because she's not working hard. She's been working hard. She's probably harder. I think that she falls into the respectability politics kind of generation where it's like, you just iron your khakis and button up real tight and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, massa, no, massa, like just kind of like floating by. Whatever, I get that. If that gets you safely, I mean, we're talking about, she grew up with segregation. She grew up with, she's sort of the generation that's moving into America, and Americans are mad. So she grew up fighting Black kids, white kids, and being so scared. I remember like that was like her always telling us like, be safe, you gotta be careful, like, and feeling that anxiety constantly. So yeah, a lot of words have like heavier impact that I might not, that I think I take for granted, or that she doesn't see because it wasn't a big deal back in the day. For example, I feel like, especially with treatment of women, I think that's going to be a whole lot harder like, kind of conversation, because like I'm just like, Ma, no, what your boss did is inappropriate, absolutely, and it shouldn't have never happened to you, and I'm sorry that it did. And I think that like throws her off, like, whoa, like no one's apologizing either. These things have happened, overlooked, and you just got to bury it or move on or let go, like in her mind, I think. Yeah, so I definitely feel her trying not to relive this trauma, and I try to understand it as well, but part of me is also like, you're part of my life and story as well, and I want to hear her story too. I'm just trying not to be so selfish about it.
I understand. My next question is, what does this month mean to you? Like, when you sit down and really think about it, what does it mean to you? And let's kind of backtrack a bit. When were you even first introduced to Hispanic Latino Heritage Month? When was that even introduced to you?
So like in school, they start handing out like, coloring sheets, because now it's time to learn about, I can't even think, like Frida Kahlo, Picasso. I'm just trying to think of like who it was I think it was only a week too. I don't think it was a whole month. It might have been like the second or third week in September. And we would learn about 2 or 3 people that you learned about the year before. But for me personally, and I know this is gonna sound so cheesy, but I'm gonna say it anyway. For me, it's every day. It's every month. Because I'm relearning my history, and not just the like whitewashed, grand old flag version of it. The history of Puerto Rico is very amazing and it's complicated, but it's also very dark and sad. I mean, at one point, the American army was experimenting, injecting Puerto Rican people with cancer, syphilis, and those people had children, and those children had children, and we're reliving that trauma in our DNA, in our bones. So I think even like my brother's generation is 10 years older than me. I think they're Gen X or whatever, but it's even hard for him to talk about his coming up, and he's a Black gay Latino, so that's a whole other mix of trauma and story. So I think that's like the like what I butt up against the most whenever I want to have these conversations, and or if I hear something that's like racist, and I'm like, where's that coming from? Because you're talking about yourself, actually.
I like that. So, and this is the last question of the night. I really enjoyed this. I wish we could go on and on. Wow, so there are children out there, there are teenagers out there. Social media is at a all-time highs, like they like to say, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone's on TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. They're on all these platforms, and not everything is positive, right? Especially in terms of when you're talking about cultural, racial identity, body image, and everything like that. What would you say to that little Puerto Rican girl or boy who has the kinky curly hair and the dark skin, and they look Black but they speak Spanish, and they may not be, they kind of went through the same kind of struggles you went through, you're kind of in this, I guess I'm kind of envisioning it as an empty playground, and you're in the center, and you have the Black kids on this side, Puerto Ricans on this side. Don't even mention the white kids. They in a whole nother neighborhood with they have an indoor playing room. Yeah. So, what would be your advice to them? What would be your encouragement for them?
I would say you're beautiful, and you don't need to be looking around to validate yourself. That we're our own thing, and it's okay. And I think that there's more of us than I think we, like for me, the first time I saw a Black person speaking Spanish, I couldn't stop staring. I was like, oh, yes, I see me, I see us. And I think that if I had just, of course it's easy to say now, that I found my community, I found my growing up is so awkward. You're just trying to fit in and find yourself. But I feel like just look inward, I don't know what that means exactly, but like you're doing you, and what you're gonna bring is beautiful and fine, and you don't need to be looking, you don't have to pick a side, you could bounce around, because we are all the sides. We're that mixed complicated history, but I think like we're the beautiful outcome of it, like it's messed up and it's complicated, and I definitely have to, I bring all of that every time I either come into a space where people are going to question me again. But I stopped like looking around, and I'm like, oh, you know what? It's been here the whole time. And Now that I'm able to do that, I'm like doing me and bringing others that might have felt like on the outside or like not picked or like put in nicely into these categories, you know, like who made these up anyway? Like, you know, like I'm just a person, I'm a human, I'm trying to hang out, like what's up? You know, you'll learn about my complicated makeup as we become friends, you know, like I'll feed you, I'll kick on some music, teach you about the music I listen to, and that's all we need. Like everything else is a system of white supremacy to categorize us to make sure those in power stay in power and we keep it the few. So if you don't have that system to segregate and to sort people, yeah, like I feel like that breaks down. Our identities become something totally different, you know. Now it's like, who likes chocolate ice cream? Okay, we're gonna start a group because that's a thing now. So I feel like as humans we're trying to constantly sort and organize neatly, but nature says it's all mixed and we all need each other and we're all like doing this all the time. So yeah, that's what I would say. In a long way, but yeah.
I like that, and I'm sure whoever watches this, if you watch it with your kids, your teens, young people that you're mentoring, definitely, I hope that encourages them and inspires them. Once again, Noire Life magazine, we thank you so much for just being a part of this. Like I said, I mentioned before, you know, we were moving so fast and had a lot going on this week, but I'm so grateful that you took the time out to just to sit down and fellowship with us a little bit and tell us about yourself and your journey and kind of help others along the way, because this is so many people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I say, our mantra here at Noire Life is our stories, our culture, our life, our community. We are Noire Life. And so, with that being said, thank you again. We are looking forward to definitely having you come back later and visit. Definitely. We definitely got to have another powwow. We definitely got to have another powwow. But definitely, you guys, I'm going to post some information how you can, you know, follow her. I'm sure she's on social media. Definitely check her out. And, you know, tune in for the next episode of Noire Life Presents. Thank you.
Thank you.